22nd meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee to order. And roll call shows that Councilor Robertson, Councilor Wingard, Councilor Mitchell, and Councilor Gardner are with us. And item 2 is tax acquired property redemption request 173 Kelly Road.
Good evening, folks. Bella, I think we have the property owner
Yes.
with us as an attendee. If we could elevate them to panelists, that would be great. I'm gonna go ahead and start. Folks received some information in their background material about this redemption. So the town has foreclosed on property at 173 Kelly Road. You received a copy of the policy that guides our redemptions, which calls for the town to set a redemption price equal to all of the taxes, interest, and fees that have accrued, plus a 15% administrative fee. So if you have questions about the policy, I'm happy to talk with you about that. I had come to council earlier asking for some leeway to negotiate with this property owner under the impression that this was a primary residence. In the midst of our conversations, they have actually moved from the residence and are now living in a different town and renting this parcel. So I'm bringing this back to council because it is outside of my scope of authority, I think. The property owner has indicated that they don't have funds available to be able to pay the full redemption price and is asking council to consider an alternative. I didn't have a chance to talk to the town attorney until this afternoon. He's been away. But I did send an email to council earlier today explaining that my concerns around the land purchase installment agreement are in fact valid. It's always nice when you pay money to have somebody agree with you. Also the idea had come up to potentially sell the property and be able to give the proceeds net of the redemption price back to the property owner from a counselor. And we are not able to do that without the ordinance in place that would allow us to give a property owner back the net difference. When I talked to the town attorney about what it would take to put an ordinance like that into place, it's absolutely doable. It would take a few months though, because we would be building something from scratch. He is not aware of it being done anywhere in Maine. Have I given enough background?
Yes, I think you have. I hope everybody had a chance to read the memo that included the information from our attorney, because I think he had outlined a very clear path forward for us, at least in his opinion. So I'm interested in hearing from councilors. Is the individual here and wanting to make any statement? We've received a letter from him, which I'm sure we've all read. But if he would like to comment on it, I'd certainly be happy to have him.
Can anyone hear me? Did I do this
Yes.
right?
Yeah, you're fine.
I'm sorry, I can't. I'm not sure. I can't figure out how to get a picture up there for you.
That's okay, as long as we can hear you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, this is just a big mistake on my half. I was letting somebody else take care of money issues and did not realize, and it's a bad excuse. Didn't realize how far it has gone. I have sold property, and when we were talking to the town manager back in November, we hadn't moved. My dad had his house where I grew up in Exeter. He had moved, and it came up, and all of a sudden we moved out in December. It wasn't like a big planned thing. And we use the proceeds. I understand making money off the house. We use the proceeds from the rent to rent this house. I think I said that all in the letter, but that's unfortunate on my half that we made this mistake. That's about all I have to say.
Well, thank you for your comment, and your letter was very clear, and we appreciate you sending it to us. Councilors have any questions or comments? I'm having a hard time thinking that we should do anything other than has been recommended by our attorney, frankly.
I do have a question. So the letter that we received from the property owner, made a proposal for the amount of money that would be repaid, and it was limited to the assessed property taxes owed. When we look at the breakdown of what the town has put together for what is actually owed, it's about $4,000 more than that. And I was hoping that for the benefit of council, for the public, for the property owner, that Sophie could talk a little bit about that $4,000, the accrued interest, lien costs and administrative fees, and how do I say this? What it would, that these are costs that have been incurred by the town. If they are costs that have been incurred by the town, that we could talk a little bit about those costs.
So I can absolutely talk about that. I have unfortunately moved things around on my desk to be prepared. So this property has $12,581.54 in assessed property taxes. When property taxes are not paid on time, they begin to accrue interest at a rate that is established by the town council, which is usually the maximum allowed by state law as a rule of thumb. In this case, $1,668.12 has accrued because the taxes have gone so long without being paid. The state law actually makes the interest and the lien costs, which the lien costs are the costs associated with sending demand letters. It's all outlined in statute what those costs are. That's not a discretionary cost, which for here is another $207.38. According to state law, lien costs and interest actually become part of the tax, which is why when people come in to pay, if they're late, we actually pay those off first, and then we apply whatever is left to the balance of the assessed taxes. So that's a subtotal of $14,457.04. Council in policy changed that to an administrative fee, also added an administrative fee of 15% of the tax. At one point, we were at $500 or 15% of the tax. Council changed that back in 2011 or 12. And the reason that they did that, and it has nothing to do with this property owner, but we had people who would let their property go all the way through to foreclosure and buy it back at absolutely no extra costs to them. And we were incurring costs, whether it be the time of chasing people, the legal costs that accrue. So that $2,168.56 represents 15% of the total, the subtotal that I gave you before. That would be the only part that wouldn't legally be part of the tax. But understand, you're selling a piece of property at this point. You are not, you can put any price you want on that. And I think one of the things that the town attorney was simply pointing out is that council clearly has a precedent of working with people to help them retain their primary residence when there is a financial hardship, regardless of whether or not they applied for a poverty abatement. And I think the rule of thumb has been, if they would have gotten a poverty abatement when when they were working this through, we kind of work with folks. The wrinkle in this is that it was once a primary residence, but now it is being used for rental. And the town attorney is concerned that providing a discount from the policy will set a precedent when somebody comes through that hasn't paid their property taxes for other rental units. The primary residence seemed like a very clear line for him. I think he's a little bit concerned that you're stepping outside what's reasonable. But he also made it very clear, as I often tell council, you can do whatever you want. Within, but it becomes, as I think Council Chair Perry said, if we don't take the money that is owed, it means that other taxpayers are paying for that.
Yes, thank you, Sophie. That was my point in asking, is that I understand the sentiment behind, well, just let somebody pay the taxes that they have missed and let them get back on track. I wholeheartedly understand that and I sympathize with that, but I just wanted to sort of have you outline the fact that this isn't imaginary money that we can wave away, and in some cases, and that they're legal, there are precedent, and there are also just taxpayer reasons that these fees exist in the first place. And I do understand the wisdom of the town attorneys making sort of a line between a primary residence and a rental property, because I feel that the spirit of why council is so eager to always work with folks when it is a primary residence is because we really don't want to see people put out of their homes. When we get into commercial or rental properties, that sentiment changes. And so I was happy to have that legal advice from the town attorney.
Sophie, excuse me, Dennis. Go
Sorry,
ahead.
I wasn't sure how to speak up. I know it probably doesn't matter or not, but I would be willing to pay the rest of that. This was just how much money I could come up with immediately. We're back. I'm a referee and an umpire and help run Old Town Rec Center, nonprofit. Don't make much money there, but we're back refereeing AAU basketball, and I'm back making money. The COVID stuff is definitely messed me up this year. No excuse for the past, but I am definitely back making some good money, and I would be the one to stay on top of the taxes. And Sophie's been great. This is the first time I've actually talked to her, and she's been great to talk to. And I would be dealing with her face to face most of the time.
Sophie?
I think one other question that often comes up is, so when we sell back a piece of property, are we just going to be in this position again? And I want to just let folks know that Dennis has made commitment to me that if we sell him his property back, he will sit down with me at the beginning of each tax year. And once he gets his tax bill, we will come up with an informal payment plan to make it easier for him to stay on top of. And with this one, as the town attorney outlined, we should only be asking for 2 payments, one now, and then one when he has essentially all the remaining money. I think that by stopping the accrual of interest, by setting a repurchase price, I think that's fair. I think there's plenty that's accrued. But I also would be happy to sit down with Dennis and work out a budget to try to get the rest saved up, or for him to drop off. The attorney said that he can construct the agreement in such a way that we're not asking for the installment of funds, but we can accept them with an agreement. So, there are times that people come to us and I just shake my head and I don't think it's going to be any different, but I go through the process because that's my job. I really feel like Dennis is trying to make some change here that would be positive. And I and I think that there is a way for us to strike a compromise that we can come up with a mutually beneficial arrangement.
So, Sophie, no, Councilor Robinson, go right ahead. Do you have a question?
I think, hi Dennis. I remember you from umpire days in Little League.
Hi, man.
One of the things that complicated it for me was the house in Exeter. Are you and your family thinking that that might be a place you'll buy if that's your first choice? I guess I'm not really sure where the two properties, I'm thinking, are you thinking that you'd rather be in Exeter, or, and that has to do with the settlement that you're waiting for? I think you need to unmute.
Unmute, yeah.
Did that work?
There you go.
Yeah.
Got it.
Sorry. It's a little different than my other Zoom that I do, but my wife loves the animals, and if you've seen the Kelly Road there, which we got from Bob Perkins, there wasn't much room, and it was more to, my dad came up in a financial circumstances where his house, he can't do both. And excuse me, I got a pretty good cold. I guess, honestly, if we ended up saving the house and then she did get her settlement, we would buy this land. I always had the intentions of somehow staying in Orono, having it for my kids. I'm just tied in that community, and my kids are. And this was like a spur of the moment type thing. The settlement obviously is never guaranteed, but without that house, we couldn't even afford this place in the first place. We have to have that rental cost to take care of this place out here and both places, the taxes. And it still has to be money taken out of my pocket just to take care of this place. So it was another way to help out my family out here, and then get more for my wife. It was to work out something better for my marriage at the time.
Okay. I'm glad to see that you're not homeless. You have a place to live. Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.
Sophie, my question is, if we were to follow our attorney's advice and reach some sort of an agreement with Dennis, where we maintain technically ownership of the property until all of the debt was paid, is there any liability for the town in terms of this is going to be a rental property during that period of time?
So I left a message with our insurance company, but the answer is yes. You know, we are not the renters, so it is a tenant in possession. We have verbally asserted our rights, but we have not taken over possession of the home.
Okay.
I know that we can most definitely gain some coverage on our insurance. We can purchase a rider, which the rider and the legal fees would come in less than the administrative fees that we're charging to have this done. So
Good.
I think the answer is yes. I think we can structure it in a way with the agreement and the rider to protect the town though.
And Sophie, one further question. Did you share the memo from our attorney or your memo on the legal information with Dennis?
I sent him the cut and paste of what I sent you. I did find a couple typos in it that I fixed. I figure you guys could manage my typos, but I wasn't going to subject the taxpayer to that.
Thank you.
So he has access to it. I'm assuming he has seen it because it also included the link for today's meeting.
So just to be clear, what our attorney was recommending was that the town enter an agreement with two payments, one upfront payment of $11,800 and a later payment of $4,825. The later could be due at any time that we determine, as far out as June 30th of 2022. The town would not transfer its interest until it has received payment in full for the outstanding debt. So that's what has been recommended for us. Any questions about that, or? Laura?
I guess I comfortable until we talk about pushing out the second part until 2022, which is a whole nother tax year. A round of taxes away. That would be where my pause to the plan comes in.
So part of the agreement includes the fact that the tenant in possession, which would be the former property owner, is responsible for all property tax payments. So the 2022 was my suggestion. The attorney actually said 2022, 2023, you know, it's as long as you want. But at this point, my fear is if we demand all the money right now, that when the next set of property taxes are assessed in August, they're just gonna get behind again. And so my thought had been to break it out over a longer period of time so that they could save smaller amounts of money and stay on top of the taxes. Because the other piece of the memo said we wouldn't transfer the ownership unless they were current on taxes. So that is, the date is 100% up to you. Most of the time, I am a big advocate for getting things done before the end of the fiscal year. I just don't know that that is adequate time to come up with $4,800.
Go
And
ahead,
what are
Dennis.
the, what are the
Excuse me.
taxes? I'm sorry, what are taxes if we could, just for the year?
So the taxes on this parcel run about $3,200. The difference though is in previous years, they've qualified for the homestead exemption, which they won't get. That has been removed for this year. I'm just looking once again, just put my stuff aside. That is gonna go up some. I would guess it would be in the 4,300 at max.
Okay.
Dennis, you wanted to say something? You're muted.
Have to speak. How about that? There we go.
There you go. You're all set.
Sorry about that. I definitely, my goal, and I understand the trust issue here, but my goal is definitely to get it. I can't have this over my head. I want to get this paid off before our next taxes hit in like August. Yeah, I never can see the future. Unfortunately, I'm a month-to-month type income, but as of right now, I go south every weekend. I'm the assigner for all the referees. So, I mean, I'm making a roughly outside just doing basketball right now, $500 a week, $500 a weekend for basketball as of right now. And it goes all the way through the summer. So I have the potential, no problem, of making money. I honestly just did not know how much we owed. I was naive. So I just want to get back on track and get this all paid up.
Well, we appreciate that. So I don't know, are there any other questions or comments on this? We're not looking for final action tonight. This would have to be taken up at our April meeting. Sophie?
Yeah, I would love if I could get some feeling for what you'd like to see as the final due date, because what I'd like to bring back to you is the actual agreement so that you can give me the authority to sign it, and I can start working with Dennis on executing it.
I think we're, go ahead, Jeff.
Sorry, Tom. I just want to say that I appreciate Dennis coming forward with to the council tonight. I think this is a hard thing to do. And so I would support Sophie if you can develop a budget and a timeline. I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, I am too.
So what I take from that is I'm gonna work with Dennis to get a reasonable timeline, because the thing that happens is if he defaults, we are right back to where we are. But none of the
Right.
money that he's paying is refundable. So he's got if he's giving us a pretty large chunk up front, he's got a lot of reason to continue on. But I'll work with him to create a reasonable budget, which will create the timeline, do an estimate of taxes so he can see what that looks like, and work with the town attorney to get a draft agreement for you to understand at least the major pieces of what I would be signing.
And an important part of the draft agreement is going to be the upfront payment of $11,800.
Yeah, I would require that upon signing if it were me.
I would want to, yes. Dennis, thank you for joining us this evening. We appreciate your willingness to come forward and talk with us about this, and I hope we can find a solution that's satisfactory to you and reasonable for us. We ready to move on?
Sorry about that, sir. I tapped the wrong thing. I want to say thank you. And Sophie's did great. I wouldn't have known until you said ready to move on. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, item number 2 is a review of current town social media policy. This is requested by a town councilor who is not with us this evening, so I'm not sure whether this is something we want to postpone, go forward with. What's your advice, town manager?
I think I'm not 100% sure what the rationale was for reviewing this, and so I think it would be a mistake to make assumptions. I think perhaps you could leave it to later if she decides to
Yep.
join us later,
Right.
or we could postpone it to another night.
Well, for now, why don't we just skip over it? And if Lori's able to join us, she did email me, Sophie, I don't know whether you heard me, that she is at a legislative leadership meeting and was just unable to get away, and hope that she could join us later in the meeting. So we'll just postpone it for now. Next item is pre-public hearing, review of marijuana moratorium related to C2 district only. And that's Kyle, I assume.
Yeah, if we could just pull him up onto the panel, that would be great.
Working on it.
He's there.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Kyle.
So, yeah, as you know, the referendum, the vote passed to adopt the marijuana establishments draft ordinance language that we had put together. In kind of hearing from applicants ahead of time with projects that they were interested in doing. One thing that started to come up was looking at the C2 area along Park Street, where we had zoned to potentially allow marijuana retail stores. And I'm going to share my screen if I can. All right, can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
All right. So when we created the draft ordinance language for the marijuana establishments, we created setback standards that were generally meant to be taken from the property line. So this was thing like all, public schools, setbacks from childcare, daycares, places of worship, setbacks between marijuana retail stores from other marijuana retail stores. So in general, those were meant to be from property line to property line. However, we put an exception in there. In certain cases, you would measure from the outer wall of the building in question instead of the property line. And that was meant to take into account things like shopping centers or individual lots with multiple commercial structures on them, where you might have a really big lot, but there could be kind of a vast amount of space on the lot where the use wasn't taking place. So it wouldn't really make sense to measure from the property line. So that was, primarily meant to take into account certain situations in the commercial one corridor with the University Mall and other things like that. However, when we were getting some of these proposals or inquiries coming in about Park Street, we were starting to look more closely at how that provision would apply to the campus. And, we got a legal opinion from the town attorney that said that kind of exception to measure from the nearest building instead of the nearest, instead of the property line would apply to the university as well, which means that certain properties on Park Street would be open to allowing marijuana retail stores that maybe were not the intention of the council or the university through the process of us drafting the ordinance language. So that's where the moratorium comes in. It's meant to specifically apply just to marijuana retail stores along Park Street in the C2. So if it did go into effect, no marijuana retail stores, once that ordinance language was effective, would be able to go into that specific area, but the rest of the marijuana ordinance would still be in effect. So all of the parts with cultivation facilities, manufacturing, testing, and retail stores in the commercial one and economic development zones, all of those projects would still be able to apply once the effective date happened. It would just be the ones on Park Street, and specifically the marijuana stores on Park Street, that would not be able to move forward until the moratorium ended. So the moratorium would kind of give us an opportunity to more closely look at the impacts of these setback standards and kind of come up with some minor adjustments to that language to really get at the intention of what all of the parties involved were looking for. So I just have a couple images here to kind of show what some of the problems and reasons were. So this is looking at the Park Street corridor. You have Rangeley Road here. So this is the way that our ordinance is currently set up. So right now, marijuana stores, going by our current language, they need to be set back 500 feet from the property line of the university and the Islamic Center. So if you just say setback from the university property line, and then that's this whole area along here, and you can see that nowhere on Park Street would be eligible to actually have a marijuana store. So if the goal was to have that 500-foot setback from the university property line, then it may be worth it to just simply explore not allowing marijuana retail stores in the commercial 2 district at all, because by saying it's allowed in the C2, we end up getting questions about people interested in it, but then having to say, well, actually, it's not technically allowed there. So another setback that comes up in this area is the sharing place childcare facility. The ordinance, we built in a 1,000-foot setback from any childcare use. So again, that takes away a good portion of the lots on on the corridor. Now, if instead of looking at it as a setback from the university property line, but rather we looked at it as a setback from the entrance to the university, you know, that covers a smaller area than obviously taking into account the whole property line. But again, when you combine an area like this that the stores would have to be set back from, along with the setback from Sharing Place, and then the setback from the Islamic Center, you would really be left with just a few lots probably towards the end of Park Street as you get out towards the reserve that are already developed that would be eligible to have a marijuana retail store. So that's really the summary of the presentation there. I just wanted to be able to show some graphics that kind of present why this has become a bit of a complicated issue and why there's a kind of a need for the moratorium here, so that staff can put together some different options and present to council for everyone to go over and kind of get at what the true intention of that ordinance language for that specific area is.
Questions or comments from council members?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that it's, you know, this makes a lot of logical sense. I don't think that we're defrauding the voters in any way. I think that the council messaging was very clear about, you know, theoretically, how would we like to see these establishments impact the community and what we would not like to see. And now we just need to kind of make it all match up. So I think, you know, I'm supportive of this work, and I don't think that it's an issue with the voters.
Kyle, how far up Park Street is the C2 zone as you're traveling toward Old Town?
The reserve would be the last C2 property.
Okay. So there really isn't anything in that space that wouldn't be close to the university at all.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you know, if you had the setback between the 1,000-foot setback from the childcare, that really stretches pretty far down that way. And then the Islamic Center being kind of in a central location, even though it's only 500 feet, that kind of takes away a decent amount on the other side. So then, yeah, I mean, if
there's really nothing left, right?
Right. If you were to create a setback just around the entrance as opposed to the whole property line, down the whole street, you know, there are some potential places that are, I mean, mostly already developed, but if one of those other uses were to ever, you know, leave that area, then it opens up more options on the corridor. But again, that's, you know, it's something that we can go into more detail.
Yeah. No, I was thinking about the businesses that were out there. I was thinking about the U-Haul business that's out there. But then again, does that fall within the 500 feet of the university line? Yes.
Yes, and also it's part of that lot is within the 1,000 feet of the childcare
center. Okay.
Yeah. So since that would be a lot that we would measure to the property line of, yeah, whatever we did with the university, that lot would be ineligible.
Okay, it's complicated. Thank you so much, Kyle.
It is.
So actually, Kyle, we will look for, if this moratorium goes forward, we would look for you to bring back some options for us to look at, and we could make some decisions on exactly what we were going to do. But the issue for tonight is, are we going to move forward with a moratorium? And if we are, it's going to be, a public hearing would be when, Sophie?
Next Monday at 5 p.m. We have a special council meeting.
Yep. Are we supportive of moving this forward to a special council meeting next Monday? I see nodding of heads. Okay, I think you got unanimous decision on that.
Right, thank you.
Yep. We ready? Yes, Sophie.
I just want to make sure that everybody is aware that this moratorium has a retroactivity clause. So we would be looking to have the public hearing on the 29th and adopt it either the 5th if we have a special council meeting on the 5th, or the 12th. It
Mhm.
makes it cleaner to do it on the 5th because then the moratorium is firmly in place before the opt-in ordinance becomes effective. But if council would prefer to do it at a regular meeting, we can also do that. But it would reach back to the 18th of March, which was the first time that council talked about this publicly.
Okay. So moving on to item number 5 is pre-public hearing review of proposed fee schedule amendments. And this is Dave. There.
Belle, do we have Dave on the panel?
He's getting there.
Is this everything that we need to see, or do I need to pull up the other email attachment?
So Dave, oh, sorry. So Dave created the other email attachment. When he walks you through this chart, which everybody can see, he is going to talk you through the detail that's on that one. So you
Okay.
shouldn't need it, but if you'd like it, I wanted you to have it.
Okay, okay. I hadn't had a chance to look at it from right before the meeting. Yeah.
Go for it, Dave.
Hi, good evening, folks. I'm Dave Milan, the Director of Community Development. For those who haven't been involved with this way back, Kyle and I have spent the last couple, 2+ years researching the marijuana bill and what other communities are doing. And the best way that we found to do that was we literally took a lot of field trips and we met with in many of the communities who have now opted in were previously communities that were allowing medical use for several years. So we had the opportunity to meet with the business owners themselves, with planning folks and code enforcement and law enforcement in the municipalities. And so we felt like we got a really good idea of what kind of worked for them, and if they had to do it over again, what would they change? And so we left this to be the last, what we thought was going to be the last stage of this was to look at fees. And so what I have done for you, ultimately, the license fees, the annual license fees for the 4 types of adult use or medical use marijuana, meaning retail, manufacturing, testing, and cultivation. Ultimately, those are up to the council. So what I wanted to do to provide to you is some information on what other communities have been doing. So the first thing, the 2 documents that I believe Sophie sent you one was a list of all of the communities in the state of Maine who have opted in for adult use and medical use marijuana sales. And what I did then was I went through each of those municipalities and looked at their fee schedules or talked to people within those communities that I had met with previously to learn more about their fee schedules if I didn't have access to them online. There was a much larger number than the 10 that you are seeing tonight, but what I did do was these 10 represent all of the communities that have opted in, meaning that if there was a unique one, Bangor was kind of an outlier. Theirs was included, but many of the other ones, they just modeled them after some other municipality. So I say to you that when you look at these, these are at least one community and maybe several communities that have been identified. As Sophie mentioned, we couldn't fit all of the columns of the information that I've provided for you in a screen that you can actually see in a Zoom meeting. If you put the whole thing on there, it would look really small and you'd have a tough time seeing it. But this is sort of the Reader's Digest version of the longer one. And so the two columns that were left off of this one, but that were, again, that are on the document that was sent out to you, was the Tier 4 cultivation and the nursery. Those are both left off because they're not applicable in Orono anyway. But I was trying to be inclusive of all of the things that they had. But you can see that in the numbers, in the numbers for retail is in the blue column. So for example, in Auburn, they charge $5,000 annually for their retail sales. That's both for adult use and for medical use marijuana. If you follow down that column, then Bangor is $205. Brunswick's at $1,400. Damascotta was one of the ones that just mirrored Auburn's mostly. I also included all of the college towns that have opted in. I believe it was Laura that had asked that, to look at other college towns. So Farmington had done a really good job of those numbers. As I mentioned, Brunswick is in there, South Portland, Waterville, etc. And so you can kind of see where the retail numbers are going. We looked at it and said, we think that we can justify, I'm confident that we can justify from a cost expense of what it costs us to oversee the license easily $1,000 and probably a little more than that. So we thought that the range that you might want to look into is that 1,000 to 2,000 range period. However you arrive at that is, you issue us our opinion. So we'll support whatever you come up with. On the manufacturing side, manufacturing is taking products that contain THC and manufacturing, edibles or other types of products from that. And you can see this is a little bit more over the kind of around the barn here is, again, some of as high as $2,500 a year, other ones down at the $300 a year. I think that the idea behind this is that the manufacturing of products with THC in it, you don't have as much of the the odor issues that you might see in some of the cultivation columns, and there's methods to be able to curb, kind of control that. It's not stuff that the public is going to. So this is a kind of a standalone manufacturing facility. They could be making Doritos there just as much as maybe it'd be beneficial if they were making them with the marijuana as well. But so we looked at that and said we thought that looking at what other people were doing and the kind of oversight that we would be needing to recognize that in that $500 to $600 range would not discourage manufacturers from being here, but it would meet the need for us. But again, if you chose to copy Auburn or Damascotta, again, that's council's prerogative. Testing is one I wanted to talk a little bit about because it's a little bit different. Again, you'll see that the numbers are not only wide and varied, anywhere from $500 to $2,500, but there are also some that have nothing at all. And the reason for communities might want to look at making the testing either no cost or no permit is because these testing facilities are testing. There is not a marijuana facility that just does marijuana testing. These facilities are testing facilities that test a whole range of different things, anything from barbiturates to other drugs to alcohol testing kits to land use or land and earth testing. So think of them, and again, as a testing lab. It's really a testing facility first. Marijuana is only one of the users, one of the things that they would actually be utilizing and for that, and they have to be licensed by the state as a lab, regardless of what they're testing. So this would just be another one on top of that. So our recommendation was that we would go with a $0 permit. That it requires them to obtain a permit from the town. But we don't charge for that. And the reason to do that is simply so that we would understand that we know that they're actually testing the marijuana, and there are some other requirements that in our ordinance that they would need to be responsible for. So again, we went with a 0 instead of none at all, if that makes sense. Next, in the cultivation columns, the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 are all talking about the size of the cultivation. And again, in the other document that that Sophie sent you, gives a much more in-depth, inclusive definition of what each of those are. But in short, the tier 1 is under 500 square feet, and that can be either in a adult use marijuana cultivation. Tier 1 is less than 500 square feet, and medical marijuana is limited. They only have the one for 500 square feet. On the adult use, you can get the upper tiers, and so tier 2 is 501 to 2,000 square feet, and tier 3 is 2,001 to 7,000 square feet. And as I said, in your other documents that you have, they talk about over 7,000, but in Orono, we've limited it to 7,000 square feet anyway. You can't get a license for anything more than the tier 3. Again, our what we have done to come up with a range is simply, again, looked at what those other communities are looking at, and what we think would cost, the cost associated with with having to oversee and inspect and deal with those facilities. Understand, I think the only in Orono, only tier 1 could be either an indoor grow or an outdoor grow. Both tier 2 and tier 3 have to be indoors. I tried to be as brief as I can. I'm certainly prepared to try to answer any questions you may have, but our goal tonight was to simply try to get some kind of a feel from the council as to where you're going and what would you like for us to bring back at the next meeting for language and for actual fees to be considered.
Thank you, Dave. Questions or comments from council members? Or Sophie, did you have something you'd like to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify for folks that this is scheduled to be at the public hearing on the 29th. So this is not coming back next month, but next week for further consideration and public comment.
And maybe it's worth mentioning for our new members, especially, we're talking about this fee schedule as a 1-year schedule. we establish a fee schedule every year. So it gives us a chance to say this is working well and we're going to keep the same schedule or modify it and raise it or lower it.
Dave, I have a question, and I know Jeff, you did too. Do you want to go first, Jeff?
Yeah, sure. I was just wondering if Dave, if you had a chance to compare Old Town's fees.
I did not, because Old Town has not opted in for adult use, and most of these impacts that you have here are only for are more specifically to the adult use. And as I said, Old Town has not opted in yet.
Okay, and maybe this is something you can talk about it at another time, but could you describe what kind of regulatory activity you would have to do or your staff would have to do for a retail facility and for a manufacturing facility and things?
Sure. So anytime that the state has adopted license requirements for each of these types of facilities. And so on an annual basis, when these licenses come due, the code enforcement officer and the life safety inspector would have to physically inspect these properties and ensure that they're meeting the requirements that are set by the state law, which are completely different and from if we're going to compare someone who's licensed to sell alcohol. For example, they have to have security systems. They have to be able to test the security systems to ensure that they're working properly. They have to have safes and secure operations where product is stored. Again, those all have to be inspected to ensure that they're working properly. So it just kind of takes time to be able to do those inspections. I would say that the retail has the most amount of unique limitations to it, so it probably takes the longer period. We have manufacturing, and so when they're kind of used to inspecting a manufacturing facility, they don't have a lot of the security and other regulations that the retail does. Does that give you the Reader's Digest version? Or?
Yeah, that's perfect. I just wanted people to know that there is a regulatory requirement that you have to, you have to undertake and you have to enforce. So not just money in our pocket to say.
Sure. Thank you.
Dave, from an economic perspective, an economic development, standpoint, because the disparity between Bangor and Auburn, if I was going to open a store in anywhere, with the fees, I mean, it seems like Bangor is attracting business with a $200 fee, and Auburn's charging $5,000 for the same kind of service. Does that play into this? Into the fee scheduling at all?
Sure, I think it's a great question, and I've spoken to folks both in Damariscotta as well as in Southwest Harbor. That was probably the most extensive conversation they were having is how do you justify the cost associated with the applications and not discourage folks from being out there. And I think that one of the things that the council was very supportive of when Kyle brought this or proposed ordinance at the time forward was we were looking at what communities have done not only here in Maine but throughout the country, and there are certainly multiple examples of how these facilities can come in and literally take over a neighborhood. And so if you have a mile, as they call the Green Mile in Denver, it's literally over a mile of street front that these businesses have completely taken over that neighborhood. And everybody else that had a business in that sort of got pushed out just by the economics of that. And so you end up with an area of your community that is just overrun by one particular industry. And it doesn't mean it's whether it's this industry or it could be a Cracker Jacks box industry. It would still, the same point is you don't want to have one use that just completely dominates. So what we did in Orono was, you'll notice in Kyle's language, is that we, the geographical boundaries that we have placed in it, so you can't have a store that's within 500 feet of another store, and you can't be in certain zones in town. We've, by de facto, we've limited the number of places and the number of stores that will ultimately be located within the community. We will be, if you had 4, maybe 5, and I don't even see 5, I don't know how 5 would do it, but conceivably maybe 4 or 5 businesses you could have in this town. And I think that Cheryl has probably had more influence on the license fee than maybe than other things, meaning that in Bangor, it may be a $205 license, but there could be 10 other stores right next to you that you're competing with. Here, you're going to have very limited competition, and therefore we think that there's a value in doing that. If I were to say to a brewery or a restaurant that we're going to limit the number of that you have in town, there's a value in that. So I think in economics, I think it makes sense that that people will look at what is the potential that we could make in this area, and therefore, and we know that we have a very limited number of competitors versus, we're going to charge a little, but we could have, there could be 50 other similar stores in our community.
Great. Thank you, Dave.
Dave, I was going to ask a similar question. Bangor's fee schedule was a little bit puzzling, but also I was thinking about, the amount of money that folks will pay to say, have a restaurant or a place where you can sell, a bar where you can sell alcohol. And we've talked a lot over this process about, comparing the approach to marijuana with the approach to alcohol. In terms of what's equitable. And I know that, we pay the town a few $100s a year for the privilege of pouring beers over at the Loon. So, but your explanation makes a lot of sense because of course there's no, ordinance limitation really about, a certain number of pubs opening up in town. So that makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
I suspect you'd be willing to pay, $1,000 if you knew there was only 3 or 4 of them in town.
Could be.
I guess
Any other-
my perspective is really that the $1,000 to $2,000 is undershooting the value that Orono offers, and that there's a lot of competitive advantages that opening a retail store in this community offers. And we're creating and starting a whole new level of oversight that the town has no experience with. And I would recommend we match or exceed Auburn for that retail. I don't see this particularly for a 1-year fee being a barrier for somebody that wants to open it all.
Other comments? I was actually thinking that the staff recommendation was in the ballpark. I'd probably go on the high end of the range, but it seemed to me to be reasonable in comparison to others. But I do understand what Laura said. We are a different kind of a market, and it might be more attractive for business.
I wonder, Dave, and your research may show this, is there a difference in the kinds of establishments that are present in towns with higher levels? Like, are there not franchises, but are there chains or bigger businesses in some markets? And are there sort of like sole proprietorships or mom and pops in another market? And do we have, or has the council ever historically expressed a preference to support locally owned small business over a chain?
The answer is that obviously this is new to the state. One of the things that I think that the state was wise in doing when they created the laws for retail sales is that you have to be an in-state resident. You have to be a state of Maine resident in order to be able to get the license in the first place. So that that was an attempt by the state and I think it was a wise move personally that they would kind of keep those what you will call them franchise companies out. That being said, I will tell you that in our experience, and Kyle's and my experience as we traveled around the state, there were different qualities of these businesses, and that what we found in places like Auburn, and Auburn is a good example anyway, where they had like 12 different medical marijuana retail facilities. The ones that were more professional were more like a doctor's office. They had very little, if any, problems with them at all. And the ones that were more flamboyant with the, lots of lights and colors and flags trying to attract people in, they were dealing with them a lot. So we looked at our standards. That was reflective in the standards that Kyle created in the ordinance, and I think he did a good job with that. So try to keep that at bay as best we can. So I think that there's ways to be able to, as I said, I think that the state law is limiting it to Maine residents only to begin with anyway for a while, until I assume at some point they'll open that up, but they wanted them to get kind of the first crack at it. The stores, the facilities that have been reaching out to us that looking for Orono as a place to expand to when we start accepting applications, all of them have a facility somewhere else in the state. This is not their first facility. And so we've had an opportunity. We can kind of look to see, how have they've done in other communities as well. If I could just touch real quickly back on the fee thing, and Sophie may want to follow this up as well, is that when we looked at the numbers of what we think there should be for numbers, the law court has ruled in the state of Maine that municipalities cannot charge a fee simply because they've got the opportunity to do it. That those fees have to be in line, and you have to be able to demonstrate the ability to that there's a cost associated with that fee. So one has to be related to the other. And quite frankly, we looked at that and said that, our prediction, our suspicion is that the court cases that will come out of this fee schedule will be those communities that have the high end and who may have a difficult time trying to justify how they came up with those numbers. So what we looked at was what's the number that we can justify, and even if we have to push that as high as we can, but yet keep it away from the number that we think is going to be challenged down the road.
So I guess I would argue with it being the first year that we don't know. And yes, you can make estimates, but we certainly can justify something in the $5,000 range because there's precedent for that in other communities. And particularly with a high percentage of a younger population, we also don't know what the level of oversight is going to be. It's a different situation. So I would continue to push for that higher fee for the retail sites. I also think as we start to think about whether this is a cumbersome fee, if you look at some of the other businesses that have started up, they're building brand new facilities. A $5,000 one-year fee is not a significant fee when you're building an entire, like multiple of them in
Well,
other
let me-
communities.
Let me just correct that one point, is that it's not a one-time fee. This is an annual fee.
Right, but we get to evaluate it every year.
Oh,
So
okay.
we're-
Right.
You're
I stand
asking
corrected.
us for what this year one fee should be.
I understand. Thank you for the clarification.
Well, Dave's looking for some feedback so we can bring something back to us. And we've heard from a couple of folks. Others want to chime in?
Mr. Chair, I think the town manager had a comment to make anyway.
Oh, didn't see it.
I'm trying really hard not to jump in today. It's my new leaf. So the one thing I would say is when we think about the costs associated with business, and I do think that retail kind of stands out separate from the other types of business that we're talking about. It's not just the cost of permitting, it's also the cost of managing. And so I do think we are going to have life safety inspections in the first year, probably more than just one. We probably will do multiples there. And my sense is that the police department, at least if it's brand new in the community, will have some challenges in at least year one. So I think whatever number council stands on, you have some justification. I think it now, all I need is numbers to put into the fee schedule.
I'm not comfortable with $5,000. I think that there's another, that retail people and manufacturing people and are already paying high fees through the state. They have to be licensed through the state first. I would be comfortable with a $1,500 retail fee a year. I also think that we don't want to turn people away either. This is an economic opportunity for us. And we don't have a whole lot of, there's not a whole lot of opportunity to put more than one, as Dave explained in there. Farmington is a college town as well, and they're charging $1,200. I'm not clear why Auburn and Damascotta are up to $5,000, but I think a reasonable fee would be closer to $2,000 as a yearly fee, and that's probably what I will support.
To bring it back to my analogy about pubs, I mean, we also do, as in along the lines of what Cheryl pointed out, we do also pay quite a substantial amount more to the state for the privilege of pouring beers in Orono. And so, I mean, for me, the reason, I've always been an advocate all along of trying to treat those two industries in similar ways, and not, in either direction, not be too restrictive on marijuana because it's different, than alcohol, or more permissive, but to try to treat it at least in the same ballpark in a lot of ways. And so, were it not for the things that you're bringing up, Laura, that it is going to probably need more oversight. We don't know how it's going to work. I would be arguing for a lower fee schedule than $2,000, and to be more in line with, other businesses in town selling somewhat similar products. But I would feel comfortable going to the higher end of the staff's recommendation because of the reasons that you bring up, Laura, that it will be potentially more cumbersome, or we just don't know. And it is also something we can review from year to year. So I agree with you in spirit, but that's what leads me to $2,000 as opposed to $5,000, if that makes sense to folks.
Any other comments? Do you have a sense of where the consensus is, David?
I'm not I know.
Well, you've heard from,
Jeff hasn't weighed in.
Yeah, I'm happy with staff's recommendation. I think, we have heard from the voters. We have a framework from the state. I think 1,500 to 2,000 might be reasonable, and we can revisit it in future years if it seems low.
I think you've got a consensus.
Well, I think I do, and let me just make sure I can wrap it up, because what we publish for the public hearing would be the high end. So I would publish 2,000 for retail, 600 for manufacturing, 0 for testing, 600 for tier 1. I actually would suggest 700 for tier 2 and 800 for tier 3. Does that work for folks?
Does for me.
Okay, and just to clarify, we're going to be looking at the fee schedule again in June, so you don't even have to have it for a whole year.
Ooh, good. Okay, let's move on. And our next item is service level expectations and feedback for staff.
So when we put the budget together each year, our job is to tell you what we think you're telling us you want for a service level, and to tell you how much we think it will cost to provide that. And so when we shift, I want an opportunity, if we have time, to just talk with council briefly about it, to make sure that we're kind of on the right path. There were 2 items that have come up in the budget that are kind of substantial. And I want to have just brief conversation with the town council to kind of get a sense. I don't even need a consensus at this point. Sense works. Of kind of what direction we're headed in. And I'd like to start with Chief Ewing. I know that we also have Sergeant LaJoy in the background, who's done an awful lot of work on this project as well. But I want to talk about a capital budget request that has come in. It's a normal cycle of changing out our firearms. Chief Ewing has done a bunch of research, and we'd like to try something a little different or new.
I will be even more brief than Dave, which should be pretty easy. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. So I believe it's going to be this, and then this.
Ah,
Am I sharing the screen?
you are.
Excellent. All right.
Oh,
So typically we do follow the kind of the 7 to 10 year replacement schedule for firearms. And like I said, I'll make this brief and more so open it up so that you guys have the opportunity for questions. That type of schedule, now guns will last for 100 years if that's what you so choose, but in order to minimize that risk of a malfunction, which a malfunction can usually be fixed in the moment, but it does cost time, or a failure which can't be fixed in the moment in which the gun fails. So we're trying to avoid that. There are options to replace a bunch of parts in each gun, which, anywhere from $100 to a couple $100 a gun probably, and time to replace certain parts you think could fail that you want to replace ahead of time. This limits that, and it kind of, again, minimizes that risk that anything's going to fail or malfunction to begin with. And we get the best trade-in value for the guns that we trade in order to purchase the new ones. And in this case, right now, we think is a good time because it avails us of the newest technology that has come out. Now, this technology has been out for probably 10 years or more for handguns, but it's really just been tested pretty heavily in the last few years for handguns. And so the idea is adding optics to firearms rather than a traditional sight. And I'll show you a picture in a minute here, but let's back up a hair though and talk about use of force, because this all goes back to our authority and the idea that officers unfortunately have to use force at times to make arrests or protect themselves or other people. And Supreme Court has always said, not has always said, one of the critical Supreme Court cases was Graham versus Connor. And they came up with this objective reasonableness standard. Normally I don't like doing this with a PowerPoint, but I want to read it out. The calculus of reasonableness must embody allowance for the fact that police officers are often forced to make split-second judgments in circumstances that are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving about the amount of force necessary in a particular situation. And unfortunately, a firearm comes into play in that worst case situation of a split-second decision in which somebody else's life or the officer's life is in danger. So a lot of things come into play with that concept. And it's really where the optic comes into play for me here in this presentation, is that the changes that take place in the human body during an extremely stressful situation allow for that optic to be a much better choice for a firearm. And we've had optics on our rifles for years. So that if you're not already aware, and I'm sure you are, but I'll say it out loud anyway, those physiological changes include a higher heart rate, your muscles tense, your eyes dilate, kind of the internal functions like digestion stop. The body prepares itself for a fight, and it prepares itself in a way that actually inhibit a lot of really close-up vision. It inhibits a lot of fine motor skills, expecting to fight, from 1,000 years ago, fighting with clubs and running away, or fighting with really blunt objects and not doing the real fine motor skills. They're no longer really permissible under those circumstances. So what we try to do under training is teach our officers a situational use of force options process. Years ago, it used to be a use of force continuum, starting very low and kind of moving up to the next level of force, to a higher level until the firearm. That really didn't work. And law enforcement trainers figured out that a better use of force training model was a situational use of force, where the officer has options to use based on resistance seen, and the officer chooses the best option for that type of resistance that they're encountering. So how that plays into for optics versus traditional sights. So on the left-hand side is the firearm we carry with standard sights, which is a front and a rear sight. You have to line up, you have to focus on with your eyes. And actually, the further you get away from a target, you actually blur out the target. The target becomes blurry because we're trained to focus on that front sight and rear sight and line them up very specifically. But as I told you a little bit ago, our close-up vision goes away under a highly stressful situation. So the weapon on the right has an optic put on the top of it. And in the next slide, we'll show you the difference. Traditional training, and I've been doing the firearms training since 2004. Traditional training teaches us to teach the officers to focus on their front sight. And as you can see in this picture, the front sight is very clear. The rear sight's a little bit blurry, and you have to line it up precisely, top to bottom and side to side with those front and rear sights. And you can see the target is completely blurred out. That creates accuracy with the handgun using those sights. The optic on the right allows for what the body is going to do. And we've actually tried to teach this a little bit at the range. It becomes more instinctive if you can train somebody to learn how to shoot with target focus and trust that their human eye and their hand will do what it's supposed to do by staring at and highly focusing on the target. It's very difficult to do because we're doing two different things. We're teaching them to focus on their front sight and their rear sight, and then trying to say, all right, let's skip past that a little bit and see if you can learn how to focus on the target and trust your weapon out to a certain distance. The red dot optic allows for us to do exactly what's going to happen under a highly stressful situation where it's fight or flight. You're going to be hyper-focused on the target, very clearly viewing the target. And then the dot kind of superimposes itself on that for the human eye to see. Therefore, you're going to be more accurate, but also it allows you to take in what is happening with the target. Is the target holding a cell phone? Are they complying all of a sudden? Are they listening to your commands? Has the threat been reduced? Whereas in this situation, my training has taught me, well, I have to stare very hypervigilantly at this front sight to make sure I'm going to make a hit. And I might have lost what has happened ahead of me with the target. What is the suspect doing now? This is going to happen very naturally. Our bodies want to focus on what that threat is in front of us. So that is really all I have for. So let me back up now. If we kind of focus on the idea that we typically replace these guns, I'm going to get out of the screen here if I can figure out how to do that. If we typically focus on the replacement of guns in 7, 8, 9, 10 years, we're in that cycle. We've had these guns since 2014. Technology, and I've been looking at this technology since probably 2010, 2011. There were some not obscure, but sort of obscure trainers out there that were really starting to push the idea of putting an optic on a handgun because they were already on the weapon, on our rifles. But it took a while to catch on, and it is now being seen as probably the best practice among agencies across the country. They're slowly moving to it because it's an expense. The optic itself is more than the handgun. But we like to have a very, I'm missing the phrase, but it's the same type of operating system that we have on our rifles. So if we can keep the same type of operating system, it's easier for our officers to not have to think so much about what it is that they're picking up when they pick it up. So the replacement time is appropriate. We get the best trade-in value. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you. Can we pull way back because I wasn't expecting this presentation? So how does this relate to, is this in relation to like anything that we got for financials, like a line item that we're looking at increasing for this year, or?
No, it's not for this year, Laura. It's essentially doubling a capital budget item for next year. So
it should fall in
so
line.
for this, the budget that we're going to be looking at this spring, though.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
A capital replacement. Yes.
Right.
A capital equipment expense. Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead, Josh.
Sorry.
So it really just falls in line with the normal cycle of replacement. It, based on what I've seen for years now and been inclined to do, we were sort of ahead of the curve with switching back to a 9mm for our handguns back in 2014, just due to some training that I'd had and some instruction that I'd had. It kind of makes sense, and I wanted to do it before that. So I'd like to think I can almost see what's coming and what is appropriate, and I stay a little bit ahead of that. Some agencies in the area have moved in this direction as well, but the optic only makes our officers, it gives them better judgment. It allows them to see what it is, to focus more on what their threat might be that they might be looking at. It certainly makes them more accurate. It makes them more confident. Now, never been a shooting in Orono. I hope there never is. I don't want any part of it. I'm hoping that it never happens in this area. I do want the officers to have the best equipment. And this is one of those things, we've talked about giving up cars every year or so if we wanted to, and we give up one to kind of save the budget, because if a car breaks down, it breaks down. It's rarely going to be that it breaks down and crashes and rolls over and a bunch of people are hurt. It just stops working appropriately, and we have to put it away and get it fixed and bring it back. If a gun fails, if we need it and it fails, it's a crash the bus situation. It has to function every time, if and ever we actually try to use it. And adding that optic to it, the timing is perfect for that. Sergeant LaJoy, who I think is actually trying to observe from a position where he can't be drawn into this, has done a ton of research on it as well. So I feel like I'm not just the only one that's wanted to do this for a while. He was actually someone that was not inclined to want to do this a couple of years ago, and he's had a little bit extra training over the last few years on his own, and has become a believer and agrees. So there's a lot of research that he did, just coming from a position where he didn't think it was a good idea, and he is a believer now and thinks it is an appropriate time and an appropriate tool to add to our tools.
From a risk management perspective, I see 2 wins here. The first is actually more about the community. And what really sold me was the idea that so often when you hear after action of an officer involved shooting, they talk about everything being blurry and not seeing things. And the idea that we could crisp that up and give officers, be training our officers to really be paying attention, not on the gun, but on what is happening in front of them, seems like a win for the community. The other piece that Josh didn't really, he didn't really touch on, so I'm going to go back to his first slide where he talked about kind of why we change out our firearms. When there are best practices around equipment use, whether they be tasers or firearms, if we don't stay within the generally accepted best practice and something happens, we can lose some of our immunities. So we're always really focused in Orono at staying within the window on equipment within the best practice window. So that would be my two adds to that presentation.
And I guess just to finish up, the training that we do, you know, the academy is full of situational use of force training. So officers are taken out of class, just you come with me, and they're put through use of force scenarios in which they have to make those judgment calls. There's a bunch of, the attempt is to stress inoculate people so that those physiological changes that do take place don't overwhelm an officer. But regardless, all of the automatic things that are going to happen are going to happen. So that so our officers are trained to the best of our ability to be able to face those situations. But if we can give them a tool that will function in a way that will help them succeed if the use of force is necessary, is something that I think is important.
Josh, what is the estimated cost of the replacement weapon without this, the new sights?
We could say, well, if we replace the weapons themselves, oh crap, I wish I had it in front of me. We could save approximately, well, I'll tell you right now. It's very easy to figure out. Nope, that's not it. It's about $8,500 just for the sights alone. So we would say, we would knock this back down to about, well, we have to talk about extra equipment. So lights and holsters, I think we'd be in the $16,000 range without, $15,000 to $16,000 without the lights. It's roughly another $8,500 to add the optic. I'm sorry, not the lights. To add the optics is about $8,500.
So we'd be looking at a $15,000 approximate expense versus a $23,000 or $4,000 approximate expense.
We're right about 23 with everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the other question I had is, are there any departments in Maine that are now using these?
Yes.
These optics?
Our neighbor Old Town, they were able to get this ahead of me. They moved to this just within the last year. Other agencies are having officers within the agencies try them out, sort of as a demo almost.
Yep. Okay.
And Jeff, the approximate age, these will last 10 years? Is
I
that
would,
what you're
same thing.
thinking?
I would say seven to 10. The optics will age out as well, just like the lights kind of age out, and we replace those as needed. There is, in this, our estimate so far with the people we reached out to, we'll get about $300 per gun that we have now. So that's about a $5,100 savings.
That was my next question. Thank you, Josh.
Other questions, comments? Laura? Go ahead, Laura.
Was those costs inclusive of retraining?
We do that essentially on duty. There's a little bit of overtime, but we have to do the qualifications and training every year anyway. So we usually build that into roughly a 4 to 8 hour training a couple times a year. I think you're frozen.
Sorry, my internet keeps freezing. Training with the new equipment?
The training will happen regardless. Each year we have to requalify and we do skills and drills anyway. So it's roughly 4 hours twice a year, up to 8 hours twice a year.
Any other questions? Yes, Jeff?
Josh, does the academy have a preference on qualification with optics or without optics?
They don't have a standard yet. The studies that I've read suggest a combination. So if the optic is the primary tool that you're using to use as a sighting tool, the qualification should really be done with that and the little bit of a training time that it takes to get officers adapted to that concept, but they won't need a lot of time because they already have them on their rifles. But the studies that I've seen suggest at least a little bit of time spent on both for qualifications, along with, you know, putting tape over the optic and making the officer figure it out from there too. There are techniques that you can use if the optic is broken or obscured in order to still be able to manipulate it effectively.
Thanks.
So Laura, you, I guess, did not hear Josh's response to the training. But the response was
okay.
that they're going to do the training. It's not additional training necessarily.
The other
They
question I
retrain
had.
every year. Go ahead.
Thank you. Are we planning then for fiscal year, like when we plan for this upcoming fiscal year, is that year 8 or are we in year 7 right now? Or are we in year 6 right now? So we're planning for year 7.
We are planning for year 7. We purchased the weapons in July of 2014. So we'll have had the weapons in July. We'll have had them 7 years.
Okay. So in theory, still staying within that window, we might have another year of like to still stay within the window and replace these.
Certainly.
Within best practice. Okay.
Certainly.
Thank you.
So the reason we brought this forward is not for an answer,
Yep.
but rather a sense of council's pleasure. I would say that the reason I think this is on the radar right now, and Josh can correct me if I'm wrong, is that we see the benefit for safety, both officer safety and community safety at a time when the police department are under quite a lot of scrutiny. And we see this as an opportunity to improve within the window that would otherwise be presenting itself.
And there's a little bit of potential for the value of the weapons to again decrease as time goes on for the trade-in value.
From my perspective, I'd be happy for budget preparation purposes, to see this included in the initial budget that we look at. It doesn't mean that it's going to survive to the very end, but this will give us a chance to think about it some more and see what it looks like in comparison to other needs that we have.
Yes, I agree. And honestly, I mean, kudos to you, Josh, because my agreement here is largely based on that presentation. I really had not considered, and I just hearing, laser sights. It's like, oh, I don't know, is this just some, video game toy? Like, why do we need laser sights on handguns? But I never knew or thought about the implications of, the officer's focus on, the object or on the site. And that I can see how that would make an incredible difference, when you're in that kind of a situation with less than seconds to make decisions that could be fatal. And I think that it, that was very, I think that when we get to the point where we are talking about this with the public, and there's more attention on that kind of a budget meeting, I think it would be valuable to see that again.
I could talk all day.
Any other comments? Are we okay with at least moving forward during the budget preparation process of including this in the budget to
Yes.
review and look at with other priorities? Okay. I see nods. I think we're all set.
Thank you.
Josh, please don't go too far because we've got to go back to number 5. I'm hoping Counselor Perry will help me with that after we finish this one. So the other item that we had, Counselor Perry, is has to do with Gould's Landing, and it is truly a question of level of service. And see if I can recap this for folks. Prior to last year, we had been struggling with concerns out at Gould's Landing around overcrowding and bad behavior. Residents had come and talked to council a couple of times. At that point, we agreed that we were going to pave the parking areas, we were going to stripe the parking areas, and we were going to look at parking permits for the parking areas. And we were implementing that, and getting to the striping part was supposed to happen last spring. COVID came along and caused us at first to completely shut down Gould's Landing because we were very concerned about large crowds at a time when we weren't supposed to have gatherings of more than, I think it was 10 people outside at that point. We moved forward and we received some public health and safety grants from the Department of Human Services, Department of Community and Economic Development. And with those funds, we actually hired Seaboard Security to go out and regulate the activity out at the park. So we did that by regulating parking. We required everybody to have permits to park out there. Anybody could get a permit and it was free, but you had to sign up for it, which kind of kept some of the, I think, problem folks away. Seaboard, Josh and Mitch worked to create kind of an odd schedule for Seaboard to try to hit the high times that they would be out there. In total, for a summer, that is expected to cost about $6,000, I think was the number that we came up to for a 7 weeks of people at peak times. That's not all the time, that's just peak times. So here we are, a year ahead. Grant funds are not going to be available, likely, to fund a position like this. We made a lot of difference having somebody out there. We want to know, does council want us to look at putting somebody back out there on town dollars? Does council want us to look at just trying to police the parking and occasional patrols, but nothing, no special details? We're not going to have police forces available this coming summer. We've got too many people scheduled to be away at the academy, and we're down a person that it does not. We are not going to be at full strength, and so we will be pulling people in to cover vacations this summer anyway. So special details with the police department is actually also more expensive per hour than Seaboard would be.
Sure.
So I'm just trying to get a sense of what level of service you're looking for. Are you willing? Do you want to roll the dice and take a risk at starting back with our plan and seeing how the summer goes and deciding to put somebody out there later? The problem with the budget is we're so tight on the budget that is a $6,000 ad at the beginning of the summer is not something that we would really have flexibility in our current budget, at least our current budget set up to do. So just trying to get a sense of kind of where you'd like us to look and if you had any other ideas before we crafted the final budget.
Sophie, is it possible to survey the residents out there to see how they understand or what they felt happened with
So I don't think we need to survey the residents, Cheryl, because we heard from a lot of them.
Okay.
And they were very happy to have a change. And so the question that is in front of us is how much of that change was because Seaboard was there, how much of that change was because it was COVID times and people weren't going to take their kiddos to the beach, and how much of that change was just structural and actually striping and making people get permits. And the only way to test that, I think, is to try
Some-
it. And
Yeah, thank you.
I'm a little bit nervous. You know, we start in May. Memorial Day tends to be the first big weekend out there, and we go right straight through Labor Day. And what we heard from people out at the lake that lived there, and not just a couple, we got lots and lots of comments. People feeling like they were safer, people feeling like they could better enjoy their own property. So I didn't have any resident from the Gould's Landing, Gould's Road, Hemlock Point area, which are really the residents that are Essex Street, that piece of Essex Street. I didn't have anybody tell me that they thought we were wasting money or that we shouldn't be doing the patrols out there. I think the residents enjoyed it. Now, having said that, the residents on Main Street would enjoy it if I had 3 sidewalk machines out. So I think that I'm trying to understand where council feels the priority should be. And if we wanted to try some of the infrastructure changes that we made and maybe put some more money into a contingency or in other places in the budget to have it in case we needed it, or if you just want to start out knowing that the system of having somebody out there clearly meets some of the need.
So I think of this in the same terms that I think of our conversations around Main Day and the university, and it's about a culture. And unfortunately, with the university, we have to reestablish that culture every 4 years because of the turnover. You know, so less turnover, obviously, with this issue, but I think that for a long time, that spot had a reputation of being kind of open for whatever, because it's the only site on there that's kind of open to the public in that way. And it gained that reputation as a place you could go to do illegal activities or lewd activities, and that, you know, not to mention, you know, the trash and all of the other noise complaints. But just in case there were folks sitting home, I'm thinking about your Main Street sidewalk machine, you know, equipped there. But if there are people sitting at home going, well, okay, a few people in Gould's Landing were inconvenienced, like, why do I have to pay for that as a taxpayer? That it's also a public safety concern out there. And I think about the ways in which, if this were happening in Webster Park, we wouldn't let it go on it would go on for 5 minutes before we were on top of it. And that's, you know, obviously easier and less costly because it's close and in the center of town, and it's not difficult for OPD to be on there. But I don't see why we should treat that area differently simply because it's further out of town. There are safety concerns there with drug use and other things. There still is a safety concern with COVID. And we do need to, I think we did a good job beginning to establish a new reputation last summer, but I think that we need to firm that reputation up and treat that space the way we would treat it if it were happening in the center of town at Webster Park.
Mitch, I'm wondering if there's anything you want to add to this conversation.
Not really. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that that it is a very heavily used area, and it's not a very big area when you really look at it. And the biggest challenge that you have is the parking. And when you get too many people there, if people park in the parking spaces and nobody else goes there, all the things are taken care of. And I think that's what we saw over the summer, having somebody out there, was that people, when they parked in the parking spots and people were there, the numbers were at a reasonable place that weren't causing issues. And having somebody there can answer questions and that can keep people kind of in line is helpful. and can alert the police when there's an issue, and I think that's a positive thing. And I think it's not going to change because it is the only public access point on Pushaw. There are no other public access points. So, you're going to get people that go there.
Other comments or questions? The cost of this, Sophie, was, what did you say, $6,000?
Yeah, so we did back of the envelope estimate. For the budget, we would actually reach out to Seaboard. Our thought is to have somebody who is trained and comes with their office car, which is what Seaboard does, makes a lot more sense than hiring a high school student to sit out there on the dock, which is what they did years and years ago. I would feel much more comfortable having somebody who could actually address concerns as opposed to
And do we have them out there every day? Do we have them out there part-time? How does that work?
Mitch and Josh scheduled that last year.
I think Mitch scheduled that last year.
So the way that we ended up doing it was really looking at, and actually how it worked pretty well was we looked at busiest times. So they were out there, usually starting, depending upon the day, but later in the week and on the weekends. And the other thing that was actually good about it was the way we managed it. If it was a rainy day, they didn't come. So you weren't paying to have them out there if it wasn't nice out there. So we basically looked at it as where were the prime times, and Ed Lesky had been there the summer before and kind of had a good handle on that as well. So we worked together to kind of come up with that, like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday type of thing, and judging a little bit longer on the weekends, a little bit less time during the weeks, but the kind of the heavy times.
Good. Thanks, Mitch. So the question is, are we okay having this in the draft budget document that we look at and measure it against other priorities that we have when we go through it? I'm in favor of it.
Yes, I think that's a good way to move forward with this.
Yeah, I think you have a consensus.
That's a good sense. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Councillor Perry, would it be possible to go back up to number 5 because we missed one fee that I'd like to add to the
Sure.
fee schedule?
Yep.
And that fee has to do with police fees for large police response to large gatherings. The ordinance talks about the fee that we will charge to respond to a large gathering. It does not, but we have not yet set a fee for that. That came to our attention when we were pouring through the ordinance. We were simply passing along actual costs. And what we would like to do is the ordinance allows for a fee of up to $500. Staff is of course recommending $500, but we would like to kind of talk about trying to get that in place before the April 28th main day to maybe be a deterrent to folks.
Any questions, concerns about that? Laura?
Is that for any level of response or just for one car to show up?
So no, so the police fee to respond to large gatherings is something that we only charge when we have a pretty significant response to police services. So in the 10 years I've been here, I have only billed 2 property owners for the large gathering. One was the Reserve and the other was the Avenue. So it's not designed to be for a rental, like a three unit home has or a single family home has a problem. If it could be used, but there would have to be some significant warnings and problems there because it is intended for a large gathering.
And you said the state sets a maximum, sets a range. So where did you get the range, or you just came up with that as a recommendation?
No, the maximum is actually in our ordinance. So we have a fee for police response for large gatherings. It's the ordinance. And at the bottom of the ordinance, it talks about the fact that we can charge a fee. So council establishes fees, and there's nothing on the fee schedule. And it says that the maximum by ordinance that we can charge is $500. My hope is that when we get to unruly gathering ordinance to replace this, that we will increase that and tier it, so that the larger the gathering, the more expensive it gets. And the more number of times we go, the more expensive it gets. But I'm working within the construct that we have right now.
Good. I sense we're okay with that. Is there any other questions about it?
No.
Yes, Cheryl? No?
No, I was just going to say that sounds reasonable.
Yep.
500.
I think you got that one.
That's good. So Counselor Perry, I'm wondering, I gave everybody has hard copies of the financials. There's nothing in the financials that is far, far out of whack. I know that Megan and I worked on the statement and the hour is growing late. So I didn't know if we could skip this item and have people contact me with questions or concerns, or I could put it on another agenda.
I think that makes sense. And if enough people had concerns, we could put it on an agenda. Otherwise, it can be an individual contact thing. And I'll be glad to talk to you about that.
Thank you.
So you want to go now to?
So what's the timeline if we're doing individual feedback then for the town putting that statement out?
Oh, no, it's not the statement that we're doing individual feedback, right? Sophie,
It's
you were
the
talking
financial report.
financial report.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sure it was your internet.
So Counselor Gardner, Bell actually has the statement split into screens if you want to go through it and read it. Does that sound like a good thing?
Sure.
That works for me.
I just have to find it in my 600 screens. I think this one is it. Do you have the town council statement and not the fee schedule?
Yes, but that
Yes.
is the end of that's like the last chunk of
Last
it.
two paragraphs, I think you've got. Yeah.
I
Okay.
never skip to the end of a mystery book.
Okay. All right. So I'll just go into this then. So the top line is more of a title. The town council condemns anti-Asian violence. It has become the norm to hear on a routine basis about violence perpetrated against people who do not present as white, cisgender, heterosexual, or Christian. This is nothing new, sadly. It is simply more visible now as these incidents and the systems and sentiments that cause them to occur have become a larger part of the cultural conversation in this era of American history. Even still, over the past few years, this violence has been increasing at an alarming rate.
Excuse me, Megan, how do you want to do this? Do you want to do this like paragraph by paragraph or the whole thing? Or I have a question about the very first paragraph, just as a start.
I'm not sure if maybe it would be helpful to hear it all, and because it's all connected. I don't know if, I mean, I'll do whatever.
I've read it. What do you think, Tom?
I think that's fine. Let's hear it all and we can come back to wherever we have questions.
Okay.
Next slide, please. The most recent attacks have been against people who are Asian, Asian American, and Pacific Islander, and have occurred throughout the country and right here in Maine. In condemning this violence, we are forced to use the same language we have used too many times before. This violence and bigotry is unacceptable and represents an open attack on the inclusive values that should be the cornerstone of society. In our country, state, and local community, everyone has the right to expect that they can live their lives in the open without fear of violence or other forms of reprisal, regardless of the color of their skin, religion they practice, how they express their gender, their sexual orientation, the nation from which they hail, disability, or their socioeconomic status. The town of Orono condemns hate, violence, and threats aimed at others, particularly those that are based on some of the very attributes that define the character of our community. But a statement alone, no matter how unequivocal, cannot heal these wounds nor prevent them from occurring. It is the responsibility of each and every one of us to condemn not only violence after the fact, but also the root cause of its existence. These acts are not aberrations. They arise from the awful belief built into inequitable and oppressive systems that some people have a greater right to take up space and are more deserving than others to see themselves and their own attributes and beliefs reflected in the products and institutions of our society. We urge every member of the Orono community, be vigilant in reporting threats, violence, bullying, and discrimination perpetuated against you or someone you know, if it is safe for you to do so. And if you are in a position of relative power and privilege, recognize that you have a responsibility to act or otherwise will remain complicit. As a country, we cannot only address these issues with strongly worded statements or even legislation. We need a cultural shift toward loudly and routinely rejecting bigotry in all its forms, and that starts with the choice we must make each day to speak when perhaps we once remained silent. We members of Town Council are committed to this process.
Thank you, Megan.
Yep. So, so Sophie and I worked on this together over the weekend, and I'm happy to kind of talk about if there's parts that are unclear or how these things came about. It's maybe a little bit different than something we've done in the past, but with good reason. I think our frustration with all of this is maybe showing through a bit.
Can I say, so here's kind of what I was thinking at the very first paragraph. And first, let me just say that possibly, or maybe we should offer our condolences to the families that suffered, the violence, just as a, just to kind of gentle it down a little bit. But I also wanted to point out that when we say something like, it has become the norm to hear on a routine basis, we are again talking about it has become a norm for us white people to hear on a routine basis.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying.
No, wait, just let me hear me out. It's okay, just hear me out. Because I'm trying to find my words. It's so we say, okay, and I'm going to go back to Indigenous country. There is a 500 missing and murdered women. When we say to us, oh, well, this is just a norm, it is not a norm for people of color to hear on a routine basis about violence. So when we say it has become the norm, it's only the norm, once again, for people who are not exposed to this violence every single day. So I'm wondering if there's a way to just maybe reframe that. I mean, that's really just was kind of my first, it was my first thought when I heard the norm, because we are living in a white, I live in a white culture. I'm not going to say we, I'm going to say I live in a white culture. It is we have people in our community who don't think that it is the norm. The norm is the norm is a consistent constant. So when we say it has become, we're kind of dismissing the fact that there are people who do live this life on a routine basis, that violence is part of their life, and that they do lose people, and they do lose, mothers and sisters and children, and that violence is something they live with. So I think that what I'm trying to say is that, I don't know. Do you understand what I'm trying to
I understand what you're saying, and that, I mean, for me, that was kind of the purpose of the second sentence of that paragraph, is to acknowledge that this is not new. This isn't new to anyone but the people who aren't affected by it, and it's just that we hear about it more because it's become more socially acceptable to have this be part of the larger cultural conversation.
Right. And again, it's not more visible.
If I could just let me finish.
Okay.
If it would help to say it has become the norm to hear on the news, because that's really kind of where I was going with that. It's the norm for people of color and people who have to deal with this kind of violence and bigotry, and it is not new to them. I understand your point, but the sentence is trying to express that what was the way that this flourishes is in the larger cultural silence, and that silence is lessening now, but we're not there yet. And so, the idea behind this is not to denigrate or not acknowledge other people's experience, but rather to say it has become the norm to hear about it for exactly the reasons that you're outlining. Like, it's become the norm because the larger dominant cultural narrative has not included the experiences of this people, but now it does on a more routine basis.
Okay.
So if adding something like in the news or in the media, it makes it.
I think it softens it a little bit. I think that
I'm not going for soft, but
I know you're not going for soft.
I don't think there should be anything soft about this.
I think that I live in a different world than you do. So visible. So here's the other part to that. It's like, it's simply more visible. It's more visible to us. So it's the same kind of, I feel when I read this, I feel that it's the same kind of thing. It's like we are, it feels to me almost hypocritical that we can put out a statement and say it's simply more visible now. It's only visible now. Well, it became much more of a thing with the George Floyd incident, but it has been visible to people of color and visible to people, not now, but always. It's always been visible to people of color and to our indigenous people that live in our community. So we're saying, well, oh, guess what? This is visible now, but it always has been visible. So we just didn't hear about it mostly, and we didn't hear about it, but if we had listened, we probably would have heard about it. It's just that now in this particular time period, in this particular time period, the violence has increased, and I'm probably because of the last 4 years with our last administration, the violence has increased, but the violence has always been there. So we have to acknowledge that the violence has always been there first, and then we have to say that it has become evident. It's become something. I guess that's what bothers me, is that this has always been there. I think we should also add women in there too, because there's been an increase in violence against women as well. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is that starting out as kind of this way is more we really have to acknowledge that this has always been there, not that it's
So-
just now becoming visible.
I think it would be helpful for me to hear feedback from, and thank you, Cheryl, from everybody, because for me, I'm trying to say the exact same thing that you're saying. So if it's too subtle or too, I don't know if that,
Incredibly wrong. Yeah.
what is that?
Streaming.
What's happening?
Don't know.
Someone's talking.
No, it's
But
it's okay, Megan. That was my
so,
first,
yep.
that was my first impression. So I just wanted to
So-
flesh that out.
So
It's
for
okay,
me,
thank you.
the entire first paragraph is trying to say exactly what you're saying, Cheryl. So if that's
I
not,
know, it doesn't
okay,
read that,
I
it doesn't
get-
read that way
I
to
get
me.
that. I get that it doesn't read that way for you. I think that it would be helpful if we could all talk about whether, and I, as a writer, I understand this. What's in your head doesn't always make it to the audience. So what do folks think?
Other comments from folks?
I guess I just have two observations. One, I think where we're at as a council reviewing this and the back and forth around wording supports a reason to have that we need help in this area around diversity in our community and the words we choose and the stances that we take. So that's one observation that I'm making. Two, as much as I strongly feel like we need to come out with a very direct and clear condemnation and steps that people can take against this violence. This statement I thought was pretty long and intense and went beyond even just Orono. And so I was caught off by the people who don't present even aspect of the statement at the start. I think wordsmithing at this point is tough, but I have wordsmithy thoughts in my head. So that's where I'm at.
Other comments, reactions?
Maybe Sophie and Megan, you can speak to the difference between a proclamation and a statement or a statement of intent. Just how those things work differently as council speaks.
Good point.
So I'm gonna hop in here. I'm gonna ask Belle, can you take these words down now? Because everybody has them, I think. I'd like to see people's faces. So a statement is just that. It is a statement, whether it's made by the town manager, the council chair and the town manager, the council chair alone, the full council. It is the speaking with a voice on behalf of the town. A proclamation is a more formal document that gets wordsmithed. A statement, I think, is supposed to go out it's supposed to be more responsive, Jeff, as opposed to a thought out piece. And I'm gonna jump in here because quite honestly, I think Megan did a great job kind of softening what was originally my statement, and some of the places that you guys are really diving into are my words, and I don't want people to feel like they have to go with them, but I will just say that I think if folks want something that's softer, I am not the individual to provide those words. That I personally am in a place of feeling exactly what you guys got. And for me, there is a shift, Cheryl, and it's because of the age I am. And I lived for a long time with my family in ways that I wasn't afraid, and now I am afraid. So I I want council to have the words it wants. And if that means throwing this all out and creating something that's softer, you know, that is perfectly fine. I just don't, I don't know that I am the best person to help you with this.
I think so. It's really just more acknowledging that this violence has been going on for many more years than, and we don't necessarily see it, or we didn't see it until it was pointed out to us. And I have to agree that the acts of violence with the media, that we see a lot more because of the media, but that it was always there. And I think that what we're looking at is as white folks, is maybe it's been brought to a new level of consciousness, possibly. I think that we have people in our community who will go, this is not new for us. This is not new for us. And then, when we think about visibility, it's just that you weren't looking. It's not that it hasn't been visible. It's just that you weren't looking and you weren't listening and you weren't paying attention. So that's kind of where I sit, right at that very beginning. So, and when I say softer, I mean more, it is fairly intense. And it does express outrage, for sure, and fear for sure. But if we speak for people in our community, we should try to make an effort to speak for all of our people. So I guess that's kind of what I was thinking.
So what I would say is, and again, I prefaced, reading this statement by saying it's a bit different than maybe what we normally would put out, if anything, because there are times we haven't put anything out. And I think that the shared vibration that Sophie and I were both on and working on this is, I'm not picking on the word gentle. I'm not like, this isn't like, oh, gentle, but what is the criticism of Orono Town Council in specific and politicians and legislative bodies in general? Talk, 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 do nothing. And not only just talk, 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 but do nothing in your talk, 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 to say the same pat thoughts and prayers over and over again. And what does that do? And I think that the feeling that I felt like I was channeling from the material that Sophie had sent to me is something that it's a feeling that I share, which is, how many times can you say the same boilerplate language of thoughts and prayers, and we are with you and we grieve with you, we grieve with you. Okay, well, how do we fix it? And that was kind of where this statement was trying to go. We can't just put out a statement. We can't just say, oh, we're so sorry. We hope this doesn't happen again. We have to make a call to the community to say, it doesn't just come with a statement after the fact, or even hate crime legislation, which only helps prosecuting hate crimes after the fact. Where the real change comes is in a cultural shift where it becomes unacceptable to make a racist joke and think that people in your vicinity aren't going to stop and say, hey, that's not okay. It's the daily actions. It's the choices that people make on a daily basis to speak up and to say, you know what, that's not acceptable here. And that's how the cultural shift happens, so that we're not putting out these statements. And so I am happy to go with what the group wants. I am not going to like fist fight anybody over this statement, but this is where I believe in my heart that we can be more than just the same old. Council has a reputation for doing things too slowly or not at all, and doing things too weakly and not strongly enough, and not really come out and say what we really think, or because we're putting out some political sounding statement. I don't want to do that this time. So that's why I went in this direction. But again, I'm one person. And so I'm happy for somebody else. If other folks on council want to write a new statement and you want to take some time to workshop it, I'm fine with that. This is where I'm at, and I feel very strongly about it.
Go
Laura?
ahead, Laura.
Jeff had made a comment about the proclamation before that ties it into our community more and what's going on here. And I noticed that I put in the chat, UMaine statement referred to this happening in our community. And I like that there's like specific actionable things in this statement that you can do.
Mhm.
I feel like it's broader than us when I read it. Like, as a country, we cannot address this. And to me, it should be in Orono. We're like, this is what we want you to do. And like, yes, we can try and make a broader statement, but I just think kind of tying it to us matters and what we're here gathered to do. And I there's something about that first paragraph that catches me a little bit odd, and Cheryl caught it in a way that I wouldn't have articulated it. But so those are my, I think if the first paragraph referred to something Orono, and the last paragraph wasn't about the country, I would say go ahead completely. And I would really hope that we as a council can acknowledge that we need help finding the words, the perspective, the experience of people with lived experience, because it's very difficult to have conversations about in third person about how people with lived experience are going to hear our words. We need their voices at the table on this.
Any other comments? I'm not sure where we're going to go with this. It doesn't sound like folks are ready to move forward with it at this point. Is that?
I'm fine because I think we need to move. I just,
Okay.
I'm telling you my two areas where it give me pause, but I'd rather move than not move, I think. So, yeah.
Okay, there's one.
Can I respectfully submit then, I did this on my day off, and for folks who feel very strongly about the particular parts, if you would like to have a crack at it, that would save me a lot of missing sleep because I don't have it, you know, that would be, it would be helpful because I also don't want to channel, I don't want to presume to know exactly what it is that folks want. So, you know, if Cheryl and Laura could take a crack at those parts and send it back to us.
I can too, but I don't want to, I think the work that you do, Megan, is really good. And I'm not saying that. And Sophie too, I think the two of you are a good team. So I think it would just, kind of like Laura, it just hit me a little funny. And it felt, and I'm not really sure that us putting out a statement is going to cause a cultural paradigm shift. I think it's going to create a, I mean, whoever reads it or whatever, but I've never been one to, to fight violence with violence or to respond to something with anger, but to really kind of take a look at what's going on with everyone. And so I think that was the first thing that thought, I mean, I'm very close with the Indigenous population, as you know, and I have many conversations with people that see even poverty as violence on an everyday basis, and we're not addressing that kind of issue. We're not addressing socioeconomic stuff, but poverty is violence, and it is perpetuated by our systemic institutions. The other part that I was looking at was more of a I'm not going to go there. It's too far down on the page. But so so we see things happening now in the world, and we are getting more, and it is getting more press than it did before, and police violence and all of the things that are happening today. And it's unfortunate and it's unbearable sometimes for me to see all the violence that's going on. But I think that when we take a stand, we have to take a stand and not grandstand. And I sometimes I think that that's what it feels like, is we're just grandstanding. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to put out a statement like that. But I think, condemning the violence and taking a stand and protecting our citizens and protecting our students. I work with a lot of Asian students at, the international programs, and I know how they feel and I know what they say to me. So I guess it was the first read, and I'll read it again. I mean, I haven't studied it, but I don't want to denigrate the work that you've done. I don't want to say, oh, this is horrible. That's not what I'm saying at all.
Cheryl, I'm not taking it that way. Rewrite it.
Okay.
Rewrite it. That's what I'm saying to you is I've made it very clear where I was coming from. And I think Sophie felt the same way. If there are people who don't agree with parts of it and want to do something different, I'm encouraging you and asking, I'm actually begging you to help write it, because I can't rewrite a whole bunch of it in my life and time frame right now. And since I can't read minds, it would be just easier if the people who had specific suggestions could write new language and submit it to the group. And then we can just, go from there. If that's okay with people, it's okay with me.
All right.
Yeah, I guess
Sophie?
I volunteered on Thursday night to kind of redo a whole plan thing, which I spent a ton of time on this weekend. And you'll see a draft of tomorrow after a little feedback. So that's why I said, go for this. I'd rather move on it than not. I don't need.
Oh, we lost you.
I'm good.
Okay. Jeff, do you have something you want to say?
Oh, I just want to say, I appreciate the work that Megan has put into this. And I appreciate the feedback that other people have given. I am really enraged at the tone of the country right now. And so is it a perfect statement? I don't know. I'm an imperfect person, but I would rather get something out quickly than not get something out, because I think it's that important to support the people in our community that they hear something from us. So I'm appreciative of the work that people have done. Thanks.
I ditto that comment. I appreciate the work that's been done, and I'm in favor of putting it out. Sophie, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, well, I've got a statement, because I just got a text from Councillor Grenier, who was not able to get onto the Zoom. He had to work, but he's catching the end of our meeting on Facebook and has some thoughts about this. So this is what I'm going to suggest. I might have my personal opinions, but I'm also, I think, okay at separating my personal and my professional. I've heard some stuff here. Megan spent a lot of time with me this weekend to get us to here, and I know she's got other things to do.
Right.
So I'm going to suggest that I try to offer a little bit of a rework, because the last thing I would want to do is offend a member of council with what goes out. And my suggestion is that council consider, if we do a rework and I get it back out to you, if perhaps we could put it out for Tom and my signature, much like we did with Cindy and the other signature. I'll give an opportunity of kind of the crash the plane moment. If there's something in it that absolutely you don't want to see, then we'll pull it back. But otherwise, we will let it go, and I will try to soften some of the approach. And the one thing I would just say to folks is, the way things get done is somebody throws something out on paper, and what makes people feel comfortable throwing something out on paper is that other folks will come in. So the idea that we put something out and we'll be somehow offended that people don't like it. That couldn't be further from the truth. The entire reason was to kind of put out where we were and to see where council was. So, and I just really appreciate all of Councilor Gardner's work. She helped me with this immensely.
Absolutely. And if folks have some suggestions they want you to consider and doing a little rework, they should get that to you. Good. Okay. Ready to leave this item? Is there anything else we need to deal with tonight? Hopefully not. It's 8:45.
No, the only thing we have to deal with is to know that we are coming back together next Monday at 5
o'clock.
p.m. for a special council meeting for a couple public hearings and a workshop that has two major items. One is Councilor Mitchell's DEI offering back to the group, and the other is Rob Yerxa and I are hopefully going to get you to agree to some asset management policies, burning stuff. Pop your popcorn.
Awesome. Laura?
I have one more question. So if I share my document with the rest of council right now, can nobody email me back about it? Or
No, individual is fine because it's your presentation that you're offering. What's not okay is back and forth
with the group?
with the group.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
And the other piece, Councilor Mitchell, is that ultimately you're going to be discussing this. So when you go through your discussion next Monday, you would talk a little bit, I'm going to assume, about how you got to where you were with the presentation. So if there was.
That's good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. If we are all set, then we'll take a motion to adjourn. Please.
So moved.
There. And let's just do a wave of hands and thank you all for hanging in for a long meeting. And it's way past my supper time. See you next Monday.